This time on Poll Hub, it was one for the history books. The longest State of the Union ever this week from President Trump was not actually very much different from a campaign rally, but it comes at a time when a growing majority of Americans seem pretty unhappy with how he's running things. We're going to look at the polling, and we will unpack the performance. Then, you've been to a grocery store lately? Food inflation is driving Americans nuts. We're looking at exactly how bad it is and maybe why some Americans aren't so happy about how things are going because of what they're seeing at the grocery store. And then finally, would you eat dinner in darkness, total darkness, like blacked out, where you didn't even know what you were eating? Turns out people pay a pretty penny to do that. I've done it. We're going to talk about that and see how many Americans would like to share the experience. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
So it was the longest State of the Union ever. How long, Lee? How long was it?
Well, I clocked it at 1 hour and 47 minutes, breaking his 1 hour and 40-minute record set previously.
And I remember when Bill Clinton gave State of the Unions that people thought were way too long, and Obama gave some long ones too. Anyway, the State of the Union, out of the way. In general, not a hugely impactful bit of political performance in American political history in the day-to-day. It doesn't tend to do very much, but I think it's really interesting to look at this State of the Union in light of what we've been seeing in the polling. And let me talk about some of that, including our own polling, and then we can dive in to unpacking what he did, the performance, as I said, but also what he accomplished or didn't accomplish in light of some of this polling. So we had a poll out just this week. 57% of Americans say the State of the Union is not very strong or not strong at all. 43% the opposite of that. Of course, there's a big partisan divide. 79% of Democrats, 68% of independents. I think that's important to look at. And just 23% of Republicans say the country is not strong. A big majority of Republicans say the opposite. The country is quite strong. 60% of Americans say the country is worse off than it was a year ago. Again, big partisan divide. 90% of Democrats say that. Again, look at the independent number. 68% of independents say that. 82% of Republicans say, no, we're better off than we were a year ago. A couple other notes about how people are perceiving the government and democracy. 68% of Americans say the system of checks and balances is not working well. That is more than 2/3. Among Republicans, 43% say the system is not working well. That's up from 26% a year ago. Among independents, it's 75%. That's up from 64%. Again, I think we'll talk about the lack of partisan divide there may be that the people in different parties see that question as meaning something different. And finally, right direction, wrong direction. 55% say President Trump is moving the country in the wrong direction, change for the worse. 37% say he's moving in the right direction. His approval rating kind of mirrors that, not just in our poll, but many, many other polls. High 30s, mid to high 30s for a approval rating, and mid to high 50s for a disapproval rating, including some very high, strongly disapprove for President Trump. So, Lee, big speech, a lot of very classic Trump. I don't think there's any other way to put it. It was like his campaign rallies, very histrionic and performative and dramatic. Did he do anything to help him change the trajectory of this polling, which has for an entire year, pretty much consistently month over month, in poll after poll, been going the wrong direction for him?
Well, let's put it this way. There's nothing especially new in the presentation. So it's not like today we're out measuring cost of living ceiling or a minimum wage this. It was sort of, the punchlines he's been given. I'm struck by, if you look at what Trump said and you watched the Democrat Spanberger's response, the Democratic response to it, I get the feeling that both speakers were talking to future campaign points. And it was almost like the same thing. So, what is Spanish? She starts with 3 questions. Okay. So she says, is the president working to make your life more affordable? She says no. Trump says yes. Is the president keeping America safe at home and abroad? She says no. He says yes. Is the president working for you? Well, no and yes. And then, of course, we have, Trump talking about prices are falling, including drug prices. That's, somewhat erroneous when he cites 100% drop in drug prices, which would make everything free. But I get the feeling that those are the talking points for both sides when it comes to the midterm elections. So in a sense, they teed them both up and just have a very different perception of it. I'm struck by, you say Trump being Trump. how often has a president ranked out the Supreme Court in front of the Supreme Court when they're sitting there, who he certainly did not think was a bad group when they gave him the immunity and a lot of other things, but they certainly he wasn't happy with the tariff decision. And, the fact that, one side of the audience gets up and the other side sits on their hands, the partisan talk, we've been seeing that a long time now. A little heckling from the audience. A couple of Democrat congressmen were playing the role of Marjorie Taylor Greene from a previous, when Biden was doing the speech. So, that sort of
or back to Obama. You lie.
You lie. Yeah. And so, so we're getting a kind of what's happening in American politics is sort of now reflected in what goes on inside that room last night and for others. And so now that's sort of the reaction to it. I mean, not a whole lot new, and certainly a very partisan presentation. And I think it was Ronald Reagan, correct me if I'm wrong, who started with recognizing people in the audience to kind of like have them stand up. And I think that's probably gotten to be, a little bit overplayed now. I mean, I don't want to take away from the people who were there, but to have the hockey team all come down and stand. I mean, it was nice theater, but it really isn't a whole lot to do with the State of the Union.
Yeah. So Mary, we know from a long trend that not that many people watch the State of the Union. I mean, it's millions of people, but we have many hundreds of millions of people in this country. And most people see clips either on the news if they follow the news, or nowadays they see it clips in Twitter or TikTok or not Twitter, sorry, X, or Instagram Reels or something like that. I'm just curious, we have seen in every poll, not just our poll, all the pollings, that the most important issue to Americans is prices. It's something around the economy. Did he do enough? And will enough people actually see that? Because who's clipping the economy bits when he's talking about lowering prices? They're clipping the bits where he's got the hockey team or he's pointing to people who've been injured by immigrants. That's what gets clipped. Did he accomplish anything in terms of dealing with the number one issue for Americans?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he very much tried to bring home, we are better off than we were vis-a-vis the past administration. I mean, that was something that really struck me about the speech last night, which it was a very much this administration, this party against, and pick your target. I mean, against Democrats, against undocumented immigrants. So I think he was really trying to hammer home that under his administration, the economy is doing better. But I think that message was lost when he was really trying to touch upon so many different messages. And to Lee's point about the optics in the chamber, there were so many references to the guests that to a large extent, the message itself, at least from where I was sitting last night, was lost. So could he have done a better job at hammering home the number one issue? I think he could have. But, again, that is up for debate. And I think that a lot of that comes into where you're sitting politically. Lee, you brought up the partisan divide there. I think that no matter what the president said, it wasn't going to change many minds.
Right.
He's speaking in the echo chamber.
Yeah.
He's speaking to Republicans. He's speaking to the extreme far right. He's attacking the extreme left and to the left. So really, as to whether or not his message was going to resonate, I don't think it made a whole heck of a lot of difference.
I think he tried, and I think, the folks who were involved in research and writing this, he tried to plug up two weaknesses. One, he's not talking about the economy. So he did talk a lot about the economy in all kinds of manner, shape, or form. He punched it from a variety of different perspectives, from the tariff to the falling prices to jobs. I mean, it was the whole economic. And then the other weakness he's had is that is sort of a lack of empathy. And so people thought he might be talking about that in terms of somebody who is having difficulty making ends meet. But the empathy was played to the folks on the second, had all kinds of troubles in their lives. And that's where he was, I think, demonstrating empathy. So I think they were making a conscious effort to address these things. But, who watches the State of the Union? The audience tends to be more partisan to whoever's in the White House. So the fact that there was an inordinate number of Republicans watching relative to the population as a whole, not only is that standard, and the reverse true for the Democrats, but when you see the instant polls that come out after the State of the Union address, they say kind of like, well, this wasn't a representative sample of the nation as a whole. This was of speech viewers. And so when you see those numbers, had you done a survey of the nation as a whole, you would have seen a very different number, because I believe the CNN number was plus 13 Republican or in terms of the audience. And obviously that's not what America looks like.
Yeah.
So those instant polls make for nice news value because you want to know how they do, but they're not particularly dependable in terms of what really was how it played.
Right. You mentioned at the very top that how Spanberger for the Democrats and then Trump obviously as the president kind of laying out what the 2026 midterms are about. And yeah, it's February 25th, but that's all that everybody's focused on is getting to the 2026 midterms because it could change a lot of things. So let me read you a couple of pieces of data from a State of the Battleground poll from Navigator Research. So they are looking in battleground states as they define them. And there's some interesting things here. Trust on the party. So we're not talking about people. And again, in a midterm, you're talking about House members and senators. And in most states, the senators have a personality that voters are aware of. I think it's less so with House members nowadays. Maybe who your House member is, but I don't know that you know that much about them. So we've seen that a lot of voting is party-based. I'm voting for the Democrat because I don't care who it is because I'm voting for a Democrat. I'm voting for a Republican. I don't care who it is because Republican. So they, in the battleground poll here, Democrats in Congress hold a trust advantage among voters of 8 points on lowering costs for working families, 8 points on healthcare and prescription drug costs, and 3 points on looking out for people like me. Republicans hold slight advantages on only two key things. One is handling the economy, and they actually still have an advantage there of +3. Jobs in the economy is +2. Now, that's nationally, so they also did a national poll here. Bigger advantages for Democrats, making the wealthy pay their fair taxes, +23, and standing up to corporate interests, +9. If prices and inflation and the economy are what people are PO'd about, these numbers seem to suggest that Democrats are in the driver's seat, and Trump, while talking about the economy a lot, it doesn't strike me that he really addressed these things in a way that is likely to move these voters, these independents and people who are maybe somewhat persuadable in his direction, or in his party's direction, I should say, come November. What do you think about that?
I think that one of the things I've found interesting sort of in the little phrases is like, be patient, we're turning it around, we haven't quite gone there yet. And that's so reminiscent of the first midterm elections that Ronald Reagan had way back in 82, way back. And that was the famous stay the course.
Stay the course.
And they think the economy's rotten, but hang in there because, I'm going to turn this thing around. And so he's sort of banking on that. And he was sort of doing the old, I'm going to blame Biden, and it's a big hole we have to dig out of, and hang in there because it's going to take some time.
When voters who are not particularly partisan are going to see a clip of him saying, prices are down, we're going in the right direction, things are great, which is what he said over and over again, is things are really good or getting really much better. The vast majority of Americans do not think that. So when you see that clip, how do voters, like Mary, how do voters react? If they're seeing that clip and they're at home going, well, that's not how I feel. Is that just, oh, forget it, he's lost touch? Or, oh, maybe he's right, we're turning the corner?
I hate to be the cynic here, but I think that it really comes down to what people are experiencing up on the home front. That's what people vote based on their own experiences. Those experiences are what form their perceptions and will ultimately impact their vote.
Yeah. And as you say, it's perception, Mary. You're in class, you're famous for your politics is perception. And he's trying to change the perception. And if he says it enough times, maybe some people will start thinking, yeah, things are kind of turning around a little bit. But I got a quiz for you two, okay? Not a tough quiz.
How far are we going back? How far are we going back, Gurley?
No.
Are we staying in this century or the last century?
This century.
Oh, good.
This century.
Okay. I got a chance.
This isn't tough, but the highest approval rating for a speech was 74%. For a president giving the State of the Union. Who was it and when? 74%.
Bush after 9/11?
I was going to say
after 9/11.
Yes.
You guys can go. You can stay and clean the erasers after class because you both got it.
Oh, thank you.
Gee, thanks. Well, in this weather, I'll stay in anytime. So it's no surprise that President Trump brought up the economy, as we've been discussing in this week's State of the Union address. And he also brought up, it's specifically focused on grocery prices, perhaps because more than half of adults see grocery prices and grocery costs as a major piece or a major stressor in their lives. And nearly 9 in 10 shoppers actually say that they've changed their buying habits to be able to cope with those prices. So let's start off with just a few numbers here to put things in perspective. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, food prices overall rose 2.9% over the 12 months ending of January 2026. We take a look at groceries, that is food that is at home. Those prices increased by a little more than 2%, 2.1% over that same time frame. And food away from home, that is eating out at restaurants and dining out, rose by 4%. Now, 5 of 6 major grocery store food groups increased in terms of prices. Cereals and bakery products went up a little more than 1%, 1.2% monthly for cereal, and 3.1% for bakery products. Now, this is something that President Trump did bring up, the prices of meat in the grocery store. Prices went up 0.2% monthly for meats, poultry, and fish and eggs, and 2.2% for more than a 12-month period. So let's just stop there. Lee, I know you have a lot to say about this particular topic, but I want to put a broader question out there for you. Why is it so important and why is it so telling to be discussing grocery prices in relation to the economy?
Well, first of all, politically, that's what people see. They see, how much does a gallon of gasoline cost? What's their fuel bill? And when they go food shopping, what's the bottom line here? And, as much as the numbers right now are coming in lower than they've been, I mean, the perception is that things have really fallen off the charts. I think part of that has to do with the data going back to January of 2020, when the overall price of food has gone up 30% since then. And so I understand, not to get back to the State of the Union, but I understand why he's talking about Biden a lot, because it's the perception during that period that that's really when things took off. And now he's making the case that we're turning the corner on it. But this is what you see. Your food budget is tough, and a lot of other things are costing more. And whether it's a couple percent or a lot of percent, people's increases, salary rises aren't keeping up with the cost of living increases. And so that's a problem. And that's going to be laid at the doorstep of the incumbent president, whether he likes it or not, or of the party in Congress in this off-year midterm election.
I've mentioned a few numbers at the beginning of this segment. Jay, how big of a stress is this actually for Americans when it comes to feeling the pain at the grocery store?
Yeah, I think you're right. Look, it's easy to talk about, wow, did you see the price of ground beef? I mean, I used to pay this and I now pay that. Kind of in the absence of context. The context is that this is, for a lot of Americans, more than an inconvenience. It really does have a big impact. So there's an AP NORC poll from 2025 last year in August, and then there's a Council on Foreign Relations Morning Consult poll from January, just a couple months ago. You had mentioned that more than half of adults report, this is from the AP NORC poll, more than half of adults report that grocery expenses are a major source of stress. But it's not just that. So stress over grocery costs is widespread across age groups and income levels. About 19% of those who are concerned have used buy now, pay later services for groceries. I think this is like a real red flag, is if you're buying groceries on essentially credit, that's troubling. I mean, not at a personal level. It is troubling that people have to do that to be able to put food on the table. That Morning Consult Council on Foreign Relations poll, 73% of Americans across political parties are worried about being able to pay for groceries. And that same poll found it's a bipartisan concern. 91% of Democrats, 81% of Republicans say that trade policy that are currently on are impacting their grocery bills. So people are thinking about it even in a larger sense. How do people adjust to that? So a Purdue Consumer Food Insight survey from December of last year, so just a few months ago, 82% of consumers are modifying their grocery shopping. The biggest adjustments, finding sales and discounts. And look, I mean, I like to do that no matter what's happening with grocery prices. Switching to cheaper brands, and we've seen that. There's empirical data about house brands in store brands, increasing the sales of those. And then reducing non-essential purchases. I think you see that in fewer people, for instance, going out to dinner. It changes habits because food is a big part of budgets. And Lee, you talked about the things you see. The power bill, the gas bill, your gasoline car, when you're at the pump, and the food bill. Those three, if those three are up and they stay up and they're taking a bigger chunk of your income, you're gonna notice that and you're gonna have to change things to be able to survive. And that's what's happening. And I think that's the disruption at the center of a lot of this chaos that we're seeing in our political system, is that It's just not, how is this happening in America kind of thing.
I'm concerned about the people who are having that difficulty. And I think that we're all sensitive to that. Even if we are not in that lower income group, we still recognize the prices have been changing.
I also think it impacts priorities at home, what we're willing to spend our money on and what we're not willing to spend our money on at a very basic level. When I shop for a family of 5, there are lots of different things that I have to buy and things that I have to consider, even school lunches and school snacks. And when you see you want to buy your kid's favorite cookies and you're like, oh, $10 for a snack pack or whatever it is. I'm like, I'm going to wait until that goes on sale. Maybe they could deal with a less expensive option this week. And it's not necessarily about making ends meet. It's just a question of where you're willing to spend your money and having perhaps more disposable income in order to do other things that you might want to do. I mean, I know that may sound trite in comparison to the struggles that people may have, but it is something that I think people are considering. Where are my priorities? Where do I want to be putting my money on? And can we really justify these high prices and what's leading up to those high prices?
And Lee, just to put an end point on this segment, because you mentioned it, that a lot of this is a reflection of prices that went up a while ago, starting in January of 2020, when Trump was still president. Overall food at home prices, you mentioned it, up 30% since January of 2020 to January of 2026. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Ground beef, 72% in those 6 years. Chicken breasts, boneless breasts, 36% in that period. Dairy, 22%. It's been steady since 2022, but it's up a quarter and it's stayed there. Real inflation-adjusted median household income, up 2.6%. Do the math. Nobody's keeping up.
Okay, we move to a fun fact, which I must say is something I totally was not aware of. It's related to eating at restaurants. And we find that in 2012, CBS News and 60 Minutes did ask the following question of a national audience, that there were restaurants in London, Paris, and New York that want diners to experience eating in total darkness, pitch darkness, to encourage tasting with your other senses. If given the opportunity, and would you eat at one of these restaurants or not? In 2012, the answer was 34% said yes, 64% said no. In light of our previous segment, we're talking about people who could still afford to go to restaurants, but that's if they could and if they chose to, would they want to do this? And I am such a no on this. I'm with the majority, but we'll go around and take a Mary, you want to be in darkness, or do you want to watch what your kids are doing while they're eating?
Well, I'm not worried about my kids. If you're going to turn the lights out, then that's your problem, what they're going to do, running around. Hard pass. I think because I'm a little too self-conscious, I'm sure I drop a million things. And yes, the lights are out, but eventually you need to come out into the light. So I'm sure there'd be stuff all over my face and all of that. So hard pass for me.
Yeah. Jay?
I've done it. In back, I think it was about 2012 in New York, in the Village. There was a restaurant. And so total darkness is because you have a blindfold on. So the lights are on because the waiters have to be able to serve it and stuff. And in this particular one, there was also like a performance going on. So there were people walking around like with feathers, like rubbing against you, and like a play going on. So it was like bizarre, but it was at a really good restaurant. So the food was very good. I loved it. I mean, I love food, and I love that. I didn't know if I'd love the idea of not knowing what you're eating. What's so interesting is that very common things you can't identify. Like you'd think mashed potatoes be like, yeah, I can identify a mashed potato. Maybe not. Some of the things were more complicated. They had made things that were very clearly you would have had to know what they were. But what was so interesting was trying to discern texture and flavor and trying to figure out kind of what it was. They didn't do anything crazy. Like you weren't eating like haggis or something like that. It wasn't that. It was pretty normal stuff. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was really interesting. And in fact, Athen, who was our producer a long time ago, she was so interested in it that as her graduation gift, I gave her a gift certificate to go dark dining. It's called dark dining at a place in New York. I don't know if she ever did it. Now I have to go find out.
Yeah. Curiosity, yeah. I'm going to go to the students in a second, but I point out that because I'm a segment sequential component eater, which means I eat each separate item on my plate until I'm done with that item and I move on to the next one. This would put me out of business. And I think the segment sequential component eaters have to form some kind of protest group if this catches on.
Is that SSE? Your SSE? Is that what that is?
I don't know what it is. I also think of a British comic sketch where the waiters are all blindfolded. I can only imagine what would happen to the people sitting as, Cassidy, save me though. Please save me, Cassidy, before I go down that long road that I never can come back on.
If I knew what type of food it was, for instance, Italian or maybe like dessert, I think I would totally do it. But I'm also very much a picky eater. So if you told me it was seafood, I would be absolutely not going.
But what if you didn't know it because it was so dark? You'd have no clue what you were eating.
See, I think it would be if I knew the boundaries of what it could be, I would do it. I also wouldn't pay money for this. This would be if it was an opportunity, I would take it.
It kind of gives new meaning to the word. It tastes like chicken, but that's a whole different. That's a whole different thing.
I would try it, but I am a little bit concerned by the logistics of eating with no vision.
They position your hand with a fork. They help you find stuff on the plate. The waiters.
No, I'm sorry. No, this is just making it even worse for me.
It's getting worse. Anyway, well, this certainly has brought out something in all of us. I'm not quite sure what, but I definitely, maybe I'll have a birthday party in the dark, which would be kind of like a different thing. But anyway, you have trouble blowing out the candles on the cake. It's a lot of problems.
But we'd solve Cassidy's problem. We'd know we're having cake, so it would probably be okay.
Well, on that note, we wrap it up for this week. We sort of touched on a lot of bases, and we'll catch up with you next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers, Cassie Connors, Sylvia Weiser, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.